What's up, my dudes? Oh, boys, we got to come in here and take a look at this tuning, setup, performance parts, element side of MX vs. ATV Legends. So this is a really interesting thing that they have done different with this game. And I didn't really have a whole lot of time to mention this in my review of the game without making the video 420 minutes long, right? So this is one of those things I wanted to add to the review, but didn't quite have enough time to, so let's just dedicate a full video to it. You know what I'm saying, big dogs? Okay, so basically what they've done here is they have a thing called parts. You hit the Y button, right? You can go to all of your standard, exhaust, sprocket, tires, nipples. Where's that at? You can pretty much go, color the nipples, pretty much do whatever you want. But the big difference about Legends is they've sort of combined the performance parts with the tuning. Okay, so instead of going in here and buying an actual FMF exhaust and that boost up your, speed and acceleration or whatever, and then you go in there and you fine tune it, it doesn't work like that on Legends. The way Legends works is all of this different shit that you would actually put on the bike, like a different exhaust, different tires, different sprocket, different nipple, all that shit, that's entirely visual. It's an entirely visual thing. Like when you change your exhaust, that does not actually change the speed of the bike at all. It doesn't do anything to it. Same way if you go in here and you change the suspension, quote unquote, this is just all visual. Okay, so they've kind of split apart the way you want the bike to look visually, so you can literally have anything you want, customizing the bike visually, but then you go in there on your tuning, and now you have those performance parts upgrades integrated in with the actual tuning itself. So instead of having clickers like you would have had back in Reflex, All Out, all those kind of games, right? You just have a certain selection within a category, right? So we have engine tuning, clutch tuning, chassis tuning, suspension tuning, traction tuning, brakes tuning. Okay, Spency Boy apparently doing a damn lesson on you boys right now. Either way. But this is interesting that they went down this road, kind of ballsy, from MX vs. ATV to, basically completely take away the clicker fine-tuning system and replace it with a more simple, but integrating in the different attribute upgrades in general, which can make things a little bit confusing and a little bit tricky to understand because, like, for instance, with the engine tuning, the only two different directions you can go is more towards max acceleration, or you can go more towards quote-unquote top speed. But if you notice, if you go more and more up the top speed, it's actually lowering your power attribute and only raising your traction attribute. But if you go up on acceleration, you're going to technically have more quote-unquote power. So what does that necessarily mean by top speed then? It's kind of... It can be a little confusing because it's like you're mixing three different things together technically. You don't really just have like a top speed and an acceleration now. It's like everything's got a positive and a negative to it. Everything has to have a positive and a negative. Just like it would have on the gunsmith type shit on the Call of Duty, newer Call of Duty Modern Warfare, stuff like that. Every attachment has a positive to it to some kind of degree, but it also has a negative to it. And you can also go down the middle, right, where it's like in the middle. But what I'm saying, though, is if you go more top speed, technically that might actually be giving you more top speed. I haven't done a shitload of testing with this. I just always go max acceleration just because typically I'm on tighter tracks, Supercross, need that acceleration to hit those jumps out of a corner even on the motocross tracks. I think the more top speeds, like what would be more going into the the trail mode possibly or something like that. But anyways, you get what I'm saying though. Your tuning is basically everything that the bike does, which sort of can create some really interesting weird combinations. Like the clutch has a clutch shift speed, but it also has a clutch boost. I'm kind of going back and forth between these two. I think the clutch boost might be better, but the thing, I don't know about any of this shit because they're still updating the physics, It's kind of like if you go over here to the traction. Well, now that they've made the traction less slippery after that first update, well, now you can actually make the bike a little more slippery down the slippery road than you could before without it turning into Tokyo Drift Simulator, right? So things are kind of changing as they're changing things. So I guess I shouldn't really say much about what I think is the best or not, because that could obviously change. But for some of you guys, I wanted to mention this with the traction thing. Some of you guys, you might automatically think in your head, well, maximum grip just has to be better, right? More grippy on the tires just always has to be better, right? I would say probably not as much as you would think. I'm not going to say you're completely wrong, but all I'm going to say is there is a positive and a negative if you go in either one of these directions, especially if you start going extreme in one of these directions, right? Like, I feel like if you keep going more and more grippy traction, you're actually going to almost not bog the bike down a little bit, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not going to be as free in the corners. It's not going to move as freely, so therefore you're actually going to lose a little bit of time depending on what kind of corner it is. You know what I'm saying? And what kind of dirt it is. If it's already grippy dirt to begin with, getting more and more grippy traction doesn't necessarily make you go any faster. It would actually then therefore make you go slower because you're gripping too much, right? So there's kind of a balance to all this. Obviously, slipping, too much slippage, your ass end's going to be off of the track and you're not going to be getting straight drive traction. But I'm just saying, don't get caught up in, automatically assuming certain things with these setup stuff, because you may not necessarily realize the negative that it's causing to the bike. That's all I'm going to say about that, right? And the interesting thing I was going to mention about all this, kind of like what I was talking about before, was you can get these weird, interesting combinations of like, you may pick that you wanted a little bit more grippy on the traction, but then you want, like, let's say you want the chassis then to be flexible, so it's kind of like grippy, but it's flexible. Or if you're on more of a trail track or something like that, you might want more of a rigid chassis because you're not going to be jumping a lot, or a little bit rigid, right? Mixed with maybe you want a little more slip on the especially like maybe on a Supercross track. I haven't done a lot of testing with that, but you might even be able to go like 2 or 3 slip on a super tight Supercross track. Super duper, bro. But you see what I'm saying? Like, you can get weird combinations and shit like that, and you can mess around where, instead of having like actual soft and stiff clickers, now it's just like 3 different tiers both directions. And you can kind of see what it's doing to the suspension, right? If you go more soft, you're going to be losing suspension handling and stunts, but you'll be gaining on traction and brakes. I think some of these things, like particularly the engine tuning, this is a lot more what I feel like is based around how much of what's your experience level with arcade motocross games. You may not be able to, if it's your first rodeo with an arcade dirt bike game, you may not be able to handle the power of the bike at max acceleration, right? You may need to have it like acceleration 1 or maybe even go up the top speed route if you want more like handling, right? Or stock. There's nothing wrong with running stock. And the chassis is also a good example of this too. Like if you go super flexible, Well, a beginner arcade dirt bike gamer may not be able to actually control the bike as good on the bigger jumps and stuff with the more flexible chassis, but the more experienced player, especially people that's dove deep into simulators and stuff like that, can easily handle a maximum flexible, maximum slip, whatever the fuck, kind of whatever you want to do to the bike, somebody that's really played a lot of simulators would probably be able to handle pretty much anything you do to the bike. It's kind of what I was learning with this. I was trying some weird different combinations and shit, but you can definitely get the bike stiff AF, that's for sure. If you run maximum stiff and you try to get on those like motocross tracks that actually have a little bit of roughness, it'll pretty much just bounce you up off of the track, basically. Or you can start going down the soft direction, but that's going to come with its own negatives. This, with the game having a pretty extensive landing system to it, it actually makes the suspension matter. So if you're big jumping, it's going to be a lot harder to land if you're running that softer suspension. But if there's like maybe more roughness and you're going slower and it's not as big of jumps, you might could run softer and go faster. I don't know, It's kind of like now you're starting to get into that combining your skill level with your play style, with your track that you're on, you start kind of playing around with all that type of shit. The brakes are another good example. Obviously you would automatically think the hardest of the hard brakes would be the best, but sometimes since there's momentum and there's a little bit of inertia, when you get going fast in this game, if you just slam on maximum brakes, it may offset the bike a little bit going into a corner, and then you don't grab that rut as good. There's all kinds of little shits like that that'll happen if you max out these certain, like if you go max grip, you might find yourself not carrying as much momentum around the corners because you're gripping too much, right? Obviously, if you go max slip, you're going to be slipping and sliding all over the countryside, right? Certainly pre-first patch, if you go maximum rigid on the chassis, it's going to feel like you're playing those milestone games. I need that savage music, dude. It'll feel kind of like maybe you're playing MX vs. ATV Supercross, right? That's like maximum rigid chassis. Make you feel like you're playing like MXGP 1-2, that kind of era. But anyways, dude. So yeah, that's basically your rundown on the tuning. Just want to make a quick little video on that, explain that a little bit. Yeah, dudes, either way, I know everybody's going to have their own opinion on what they think is better, which is definitely a good thing. But I also think MX vs. ATV is going to continue to update this shit. So, let's just kind of see after they've done this next gameplay update. And they said, the community manager told me that was the last time they were going to update the physics for a while. So that's kind of what I'm waiting on after they make that update. And then I'm going to go in there and mess around with the tuning. So might make another video on that a little bit later on down the road. Maybe a little bit more extensive after I've done more testing. But yeah, man, either way. Appreciate you guys watching all the videos. Be sure to go follow me up on Instagram. Spencer Turley, no spaces and no capital letters. You know what it is. Later, dudes.